It's Jim Check. You're watching Kelowna Now, and I have with me Gabriella, and I'm not going to try and do your last name because I'm going to make a mess of it. Why don't you do it for me?
Gabriella Di Romeri.
D. Romeri, there you go. And you're from Wild Safe, BC. And we've had some people writing into us, sending us photos, and that we've had lots of bear sightings in the last little while. And we had a deer attack last week. One of the dogs took off, but one stayed, and then the deer turned its attention to the dog and then trampled the dog, and the dog sadly did not make it. But it did allow the lady to kind of get away from the deer at the time. So maybe let's talk about the bears first. We've seen quite a few sightings of bears, especially in the fringe areas of town or whatever. We're putting up an image right now of a mama bear with a couple of cubs. And obviously, I mean, you can tell us better what a person should do if they see that.
Absolutely. And now is the time when you're going to be seeing moms with cubs out there. They've definitely emerged from hibernation at this point in time. And June is also the start of mating season for black bears. So there can be a little bit of challenge there for moms with cubs trying to escape males that are
Mm.
seeking those cubs out. So it's very important that you're aware that you're living in bear country in British Columbia, that you're preventing encounters as best as you can, making noise, traveling in groups, and that you know exactly how you should react to a bear encounter. Because bears typically don't want any issue with us, and it's because we've gotten too close to something they care about when we see attacks arise. So understanding their body language is huge.
Right. So what should you do? Like, say if that was you out there, that was a cub. I mean, two cubs with a mother. Kind of like stay a safe distance and back away. Don't try to get closer for more pictures, obviously.
Yes, yeah, that's definitely something that we hear come up quite often. Of course, these animals are wonderful to see, and not everyone gets an opportunity to see such an animal in real life. So we understand that urge to want to stop and grab the phone, but it's really important that the first thing you do is back away from that animal and give the wild animal more space. This shows the wild animal that they're not in danger, that we're not a threat to them, and that's usually a good enough signal for them to understand that they don't need to defend themselves against us. And they'll either back away or wander off, depending on their past experiences with encountering humans. And giving them space is really key. You can also make noise, try and make yourself look bigger, back away, get yourself somewhere safe inside a car or a building. And if there's any kind of aggressive encounter, that's potentially when we'd be looking at reporting a situation like that. But not
Right.
every encounter elicits a report.
And I guess one of the things about Kelowna and the Okanagan is we have a lot of dogs as well. People have a lot of dogs with them, and they tend to want to react more so when they see something or smell something like strange to them. So they'll tend to overreact. What's the advice for people walking their dogs when they encounter a bear?
Yeah, it's so important that dogs are kept on leash in bear country. We see dogs involved in over 50% of black bear attacks in North America. And that's because what typically happens is bears are either perceived as a threat or prey. And they'll approach a bear thinking that it's potentially a friend. And the bear sometimes doesn't know what to do in that situation. So that might end up with the bear attacking the dog, and the dog will usually run back to the human. Bears will chase the dog back, and then that leads to an even greater conflict. So, the best way to prevent that is to keep your dog on leash and under control at all times. It's super, super important.
Yeah, as small and cuddly as those bears look, they're pretty ferocious too, right? They have big, big claws and big, big teeth and a
Yes,
lot of power.
agreed. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So, we had a recent attack here in Kelowna with a deer, with her fawn, a doe and a fawn. And it was a lady again walking her two dogs, and then um, the deer actually went after her and then started like trampling her. And then she was in a fetal position, she says, on the ground. And then the dog kind of got involved. One dog took off and one dog got involved, small dog. And then that dog the deer turned its attention to the dog and then trampled that dog. And sadly, the dog didn't make it later. Like, it didn't make it after a while. But what's the advice for that?
Yeah, this is a unique situation. It's not unheard of for does to be defensive over their fawns. However, a doe going this far and approaching a human and creating what sounds like to be some pretty significant damage, and of course resulting in the end of a dog ending losing its life. It's very, very sad to hear about. And again, keeping dogs on leash is a great way to not make does feel like they need to act defensively, being aware of your surroundings and understanding that mid-May to June is fawn season. And we do a lot of education surrounding that in particular because does, they can and will be defensive over their fawns. And that's not something that we normally expect from ungulates, deer,
Yeah.
right?
So
Herbivores. Yeah.
so that sounds like that area was very common for the deer to be having offspring in backyards out there, because she was saying like they always seem to have fawns in their backyard, and so I think the deer pretty much feel like that's their like their area, people's backyards. And we had a similar thing in our yard too, and we had deer, like we had I think 2 fawns last year and then the year before that. So, and we have dogs, so we finally put up a high fence to keep the deer out of the yard, because obviously you're going to end up with an encounter sooner or later, and we didn't want either the deer or the dog to get hurt in that case, right? So
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a few different methods of securing your yard or making your yard less attractive to wildlife or deer in particular. Fencing is an option, whether that's high physical fencing or electric fencing, and also making your yard yeah, less attractive. So taking out any kind of thick brush, or if there's any food that they're potentially accessing
mm.
on your property.
Well, in the
Yeah,
Okanagan, all the food would be the tulips and the irises,
very
all the
much. Yeah,
plant.
even all the orchards, right? Like
Yeah.
just, yeah, all the agriculture. Absolutely. Yeah,
It's
for
like a
sure.
buffet out there.
You can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess they get very used to having more variety in a lot of the yards than they would have out in the wild, and less predators, I imagine, too, for deer if they're in people's backyards.
That's right. Yeah, less predators typically. And also there's a little bit of speculation surrounding if wildlife are figuring out that hunting can't occur in urban
Mm.
communities, right?
Yeah, I think they've
If
got that
deer
figured out.
Yeah, exactly. So we're thinking maybe deer are seeking out urban communities almost as a sort of safe space for them away from the dangers of humans, even though it's a
So
bit counteractive, right?
when people see deer start to kind of like use their backyard on a regular basis, should they be trying to shoo them out of there before they start fawning, or is that something like what's the advice to them?
Yeah, it's tough because, BC is wildlife country. We have so many wildlife here, in particular deer, and it's very normal to spot them and to see them passing through your property. They can use these spaces as travel corridors.
Mm.
And so it's normal to spot them. If you are noticing them lingering around, potentially causing some kind of damage on the property, it would be a great example or great opportunity to go in and do something to the yard with whatever I previously
Hmm.
mentioned. If there's something attracting them, or it's just too easy for them to get into to begin with, and that's just because deer are a food source for a lot of predators in
Hmm.
BC. So if deer are hanging around in an area, it doesn't take too long before the bear, the cougars, wolves potentially
Will
start showing
follow
up
them
as well.
in, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I did notice, like over the years, I've been here about 25 years, that the deer were kind of in the fringe areas, and now they're kind of like you can see them downtown now, and they'll be like sleeping next to a commercial building or something like that, and even you go to
Yeah.
the smaller communities like Grand Forks, and you'll see like 30 of them together, and like big herds of deer. I think you call them herds, right?
Yes, yeah, definitely. And another factor that's involved in that is we see folks unfortunately feeding the deer all the time, thinking that they need humans to give them food sources. And this is very, very conflicting. It's very problematic. And it encourages deer to come to the community even more potentially. And of course, there's roads and vehicles in the community, and deer make up the large majority of wildlife vehicle collisions in BC, about 80%. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, it accounts for about 4 deaths a year, wildlife vehicle collisions. So it is a serious concern, and it's another factor when bears, or my apologies, deer are hanging out in the community.
Yeah, when we talk about like putting food out there, and I think that's a greater concern for the bears because they tend to come for garbage and stuff like that, whereas deer are kind of just coming for your plant life probably. But what are some pieces of advice for people for keeping bears out of your yard?
Yeah, so bears also can be attracted to a number of items that are typically on someone's property. This would be garbage as a main one, but also bird feeders, dirty barbecues, any kind of fruit trees, also livestock, and pet food as well. So any of these items have a scent attached to them, whether it's strong enough for humans to smell or not, the bears can definitely smell it. And it's enough for them to come over and at least check it out and see if it's worth finding a potential meal there or not. And they've got a great mental map of all of the food sources that they've ever accessed before. So if they've gotten into your can one time, that's all it takes for them to come back again in hopes that they're going to find more. And they repeat this behavior until it gets, unfortunately, out of hand, and it results in them losing their lives, which is very, very sad to hear about, of course.
We've seen enough videos of people having bears in their pools because they tend to like water as well.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. They're looking for, either a place to cool down or a source of water, or maybe they're thinking they can catch some imaginary fish in there. Who knows?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess the biggest piece of advice then is just to stay safe and kind of keep your distance and allow the wildlife to kind of have its to preferential area where they're going and just kind of leave them go. But yeah, I do notice that the deer kind of have a pattern around our area where they kind of like hang around together and kind of like work their way through the yards, kind of like their feeding pattern or something, I guess, where they're just like, oh, we got tulips over here, we got this over here, and they're just
Yeah.
kind of moving through the day, right? And I think they must sleep more during the day and they're out more at night.
I'm not too sure about deer in particular. It could be the case just because it's calmer in the community at
Yeah.
nighttime, less traffic, less noise and lights and things going on. So definitely understandable for sure. But when it comes to predators, definitely they're typically more active at night.
Yeah.
Your coyotes, cougars, bears, things like that.
Yeah, I leave for work at 3 in the morning, so I typically see a lot of deer in the morning, right in the early morning hours, and when it's still dark out. And I don't see a lot during the daytime when there's so much traffic out there. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything else you want to add for people when they're encountering wildlife?
Just to understand that BC is wildlife country. They live here as well. And the best safety tool that you can have with you is knowledge and education. Just knowing what you're potentially going to encounter out there, being informed if you're going to a new place to camp for the first time, and making sure that you have the most enjoyable time out there as possible by making sure that you're staying safe and keeping wildlife wild.
Okay. I thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
All right. And thank you for watching Kelowna Now.